On the Zaporizhzhia front, a Russian air defense group did what it was trained to do, yet it still walks straight into a trap that modern war punishes without mercy. A radar comes alive for only a moment. A missile leaves the rail, and a position that looked invisible suddenly becomes loud, bright, and easy to map. From the outside, it looks like a solid shield, because Snowdrift is watching, and BUK launchers are sitting behind camouflage like a locked door. But this story is not about how many drones were shot down, and it is not about who had the bigger missile. It is about how a smart opponent turns routine confidence into a signal, then turns that signal into coordinates, and then turns those coordinates into a kill chain that hits before the crew even understands what changed. The most shocking part is that the first wave can look like a harmless nuisance, while the real strike is already moving in low and quiet, using terrain and timing. Stay with military force because the next minutes show how a perfect defense can collapse without a fair warning, and why the low sky now decides everything. On the Zaporizhzhia front, the first danger was not the drones themselves, but the way they were judged as routine. A 9S-18M1-1 Snowdrift search radar picked up 8 air targets at roughly 45 kilometers, and the track looked clean and easy to read. The radar is designed to spot much farther when altitude is high, so a contact at 45 kilometers felt like plenty of time and distance. The crew watched spacing and speed, and nothing looked evasive or aggressive. The targets were flying around 300 meters with steady lines, and that stable profile looked simple and almost careless. When a raid looks unsophisticated, it gets filed as a low-priority problem, and that mindset shapes every button press that follows. So the story begins with a quiet shift from alertness to routine, and that shift is where traps usually enter. The site layout added to that confidence because this was not one launcher exposed on a road, but a layered pocket built to cover gaps. Under camouflage and fieldworks, a modern BUK M3 sat alongside a reliable BUK M2, while a modernized BUK M1 held the outer ring. BUK M3 is presented as the long arm, with 9 M317M missiles that can reach far and fast, while BUK M2 covers a strong mid-band and BUK M1 fills the perimeter. This mix matters because it creates overlap in both range and height, so one leaker should still face another shot line. To the crew, that depth turns the sky into a managed space, since targets can be tracked, passed, and engaged without panic. The short distance reduced ballistic uncertainty, while the rapid sequence of fire denied time for escape, creating a brief but overwhelming window that ended the engagement on Ukraine's terms. Support tools reinforce the same feeling, because the defense was not only about missiles but also about close protection and electronic noise. A quadcopter interceptor was ready to stop small threats by physical capture, which is quiet, fast, and does not burn an expensive round. Electronic warfare modules described as vulnerez were mounted on vehicles and pushed broad jamming across the 900 to 2000 MHz band, building a short-range bubble. This can disrupt common drone links near the position, and it often buys seconds that matter in a low sky fight. But it also tempts crews to treat slow UAVs as guaranteed kills, which is a dangerous assumption in a two-phase plan. That assumption matters because the real target may be the battery's behavior, not the incoming airframes. When a system believes it owns the air picture, the weak point is often not hardware, but the moment it chooses to reveal itself. Detection at 45 kilometers sounds safe, yet it starts a clock, because every second of tracking and engagement creates a signature others can hear. Yet every radar pulse is a broadcast, and modern SIGINT units live for broadcast today. A steady flight path makes decisions feel easy, but predictable targets can be bait, designed to pull a defender into repeating patterns. In modern war, patterns become data, data becomes coordinates, and coordinates become a strike plan built for the blind side. So the key question is not why the drones came in so plainly, but what they were trying to make the battery do next. Confidence can win minutes in war, but in an electronic battlefield, it can also leak a position faster than any scout. After the first contacts looked simple, The Russian battery treated the raid like a routine cleanup, and that mindset shaped a risky choice. Additional protection can also be seen along the sides of the turret and upper hull, where soft spots and attachments are vulnerable to close-range strikes. These areas were never designed to resist frequent overhead attacks, because older threats followed flatter trajectories. But FPV drones exploit exactly these weaknesses. A quiet intercept like that is more than a tactical win, because it tells the crew the sky is under control and the rest will be easy. That early success can be dangerous, because it invites a system to show its main strength when a smaller tool already solved the problem. And that is how a low-threat raid can turn into a moment of overconfidence. The turning point came with the second UAV, because the battery decided to demonstrate the heart of its layered shield. Ukrainian vehicles show added frames and shields, while Russian armor has adopted its own versions, sometimes called turtle tanks, with heavy coverings intended to defeat drone attacks. This convergence is revealing because it shows that regardless of doctrine or origin, crews are responding to the same threat environment and drawing similar conclusions under fire. On the surface, that is perfect performance, since the kill is clean and the air picture looks stable again. But the kill is not the real story, because the launch event is a loud signature, and signatures are what electronic warfare and SIGINT teams hunt for. The moment the radar locks and the missile leaves the rail, the system stops being hidden, and it starts broadcasting its existence. That is where the cost begins, even if the target is already gone. What made this choice so dangerous is that modern air defense is not only steel and explosives, but also radiation in the spectrum. A radar lock is not just seeing, it is also speaking, and it can be heard far outside the local fight. The launch also adds a second layer of signal, because the engagement sequence produces patterns that stand out, even in noisy environments. In the transcript, this emission is described as huge and hard to hide across the electromagnetic range, which is exactly the kind of footprint that can be caught at distance. So one impressive shot can become a beacon, and the battery's strongest tool can turn into the simplest clue for an enemy listening network. The battlefield in eastern Ukraine is defined less by what moves on the ground and more by what watches from above, because FPV drones now fill the air in numbers that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. At the same time, local protection measures did not erase the core risk, even if they helped against simple drones near the position. Volnares electronic warfare units were described as creating omnidirectional jamming across roughly 900 to 2000 MHz, with a protective radius of about 1 kilometer. That kind of bubble can disrupt control links and reduce the success rate of basic UAV attacks in the close zone. But it does not cancel the fact that a radar lock and a missile launch can be detected well beyond 1 kilometer, because the power and the geometry are different problems. Jamming can blur a drone's steering signal, yet it cannot rewind a bright emission that already traveled across the air. So the battery stayed confident, while a distant observer may have already started building a firing solution. From that moment on, the fight stops being about downing UAVs, and it becomes a race over who is watching whom first. While the air defense crew kept focusing on the sky in front of them, Ukraine's real work was happening in the spectrum, because every radar action can be turned into a map point. A distant SIGINT team was described as waiting for exactly this kind of emission, so the moment the BUK system radiated and launched, the signal became usable data. In the source description, the intercept was not treated as noise, but as a signature with a shape, timing, and repeatable pattern. Algorithms then processed that signature fast, and the result was a geolocation fix described as accurate to under 5 meters. That level of precision matters because it is tight enough to guide small strike assets, not just long-range fires. It also means camouflage loses value once the system speaks, since the where is solved before the what is fully understood. And that is the first quiet split in this story, because one side is celebrating kills while the other side is collecting coordinates. On the Russian side, the fight still looked clean, because the remaining UAVs kept coming in and kept getting removed in a steady rhythm. A BUK M2 variant was described as taking part in the cleanup. Then, a modernized BUK M1 was used to finish what was left. The key point here is not the exact missile count, but the behavior, since the battery stayed engaged until the whole first wave was gone. By the end of that phase, the report up the chain was simple, because 8 out of 8 threats were said to be neutralized. From a command desk, that sounds like a contained incident, since no friendly loss is visible and the air picture is quiet again. But that kind of success can hide a deeper problem, because the engagement itself may have been the goal the attacker needed. And once that report is filed, the battery's posture shifts toward assessment and routine, which is the opening the second phase depends on. The dangerous twist is that the first wave was described as a calculated sacrifice, designed to force the defenders to reveal their state, not to break through by force. A decoy raid that flies steady at mid-low altitude can look crude, yet it can be built to trigger the exact reactions an attacker wants to record. In this case, the reactions include radar activity, missile guidance routines, and the timing of how long the system stays hot. Those details help an opponent infer how the battery is organized, how confident it feels, and whether it is likely to stay in place after firing. Even more important, the emissions confirm that the unit is not only present but active, and that the radar is feeding the kill chain at that moment. So the tactical win of shooting down UAVs becomes a strategic leak, because it gives the enemy proof, position, and a short window when the unit is busy and less flexible. That is why Phase 1 can look like a failed attack on video, while in reality, it is a survey done at combat speed. After the last decoy fell, the air went quiet, and that quiet can be misleading, because it feels like safety when it is really a transition. Crews tend to shift into damage checks, ammunition status, and quick after-action thinking, since the mind wants closure once a threat disappears. That pause also creates a predictable lull, and predictable lulls are valuable because they reduce alertness without any direct pressure. In the source narrative, this is the exact moment the attacker needs, since the defender is still processing results while the strike element is already moving. The battery may still have launchers and missiles, yet if the enemy has a fix under 5 meters, the situation is no longer unknown contact, it is known target. So the real question becomes simple and brutal, because it is no longer about how many drones were shot down, but about whether the battery realizes it has been found. And that is the tension that hangs in the air right before the decisive hit arrives from an angle the radar line did not warn about. The decisive hit here did not come from a smarter missile or a bigger swarm, because it came from terrain, geometry, and a blind zone that every medium-range system has to live with. After the first wave forced radar activity and exposed the battery's footprint in the spectrum, the second wave used a different logic, which was to arrive so low and so close that the main BUK missiles could not react in time. In the source account, 12 FPV drones moved at roughly 15 meters above the ground, and they used every fold in the landscape to stay below the radar horizon. They did not fly a clean, predictable line like the decoys, because they came from behind a hill and appeared almost at the last moment. Radar is not magic, and line of sight still rules when a target hugs the earth and hides behind obstacles. So what looked like a quiet end was actually the moment a second threat entered the one space that mattered, which was the space the radar could not see well. That shift turns air defense from a controlled shoot-down routine into a close-range emergency. The brutal detail is where the FPVs showed up, because they were described as entering BUK's near-dead zone, around a 2.5-kilometer bubble. This is the range where a medium-range missile built to chase fast jets at higher altitude struggles, since it has less room to maneuver and less time to build a clean intercept path. Even with missiles still on the rails, the engagement window can be too short, and the geometry can be too tight for a large round to solve. This is not about slow cruise, because it is about physics, guidance limits, and a system designed for a different threat set. Guns, small intercept drones, or short-range layers can help, but only if they are already positioned and ready before the attack appears at close distance. So the FPVs did not need to beat BUK at its best range, because they only needed to enter the one range where BUK is least comfortable. Once a threat is inside that ring, the defender's options shrink fast. What makes the strike feel professional is that the opening blows did not chase launchers because they went after the eyes and the brain first. In the timeline described, the first pair hit the 9S-18 Snowdrift target acquisition radar and its power source, which sits at the center of awareness for the whole battery. One FPV struck the phased array antenna area, while another hit the generator at the base, and that combination was meant to blind and freeze the network in one motion. That choice matters more than a quick launcher kill, because a launcher without a working search picture becomes isolated, and isolation is deadly in a drone fight. Once the radar is disabled and power is cut, coordination breaks, target handoff stops, and the battery loses the ability to manage space beyond what each vehicle can see by itself. The attacker was not removing hardware first, it was removing control, which is the real currency of air defense. After that cut, the remaining vehicles become static targets in practice, even if missiles and crews are still present. A launcher can carry rounds, yet without a functioning sensor and a working command loop, those rounds become stored risk rather than usable protection. The battery can try to move, but movement under surprise drone pressure is hard, because drones can be seconds away and the terrain can limit exits. It can try to fight locally, but local tools do not replace the loss of the main search radar that feeds the wider picture. That is why, once the eyes and the electricity are taken away, the rest becomes a timing problem that only has one direction. Once the radar and the command link were knocked out, the strike turned into a methodical takedown because the FPV teams could now treat each BUK vehicle like a fixed target on a pre-planned list. The key idea was simple and brutal, which is that the drones did not need to destroy armor the old way, because they could make the missiles on the launcher do the work for them. In the source description, the FPVs attacked in coordinated pairs, and each pair had a clear job split. One drone hit the radar or the guidance module to stop tracking and stop any last-second engagement attempt. The second drone then went for the launcher area, aiming at the missile tubes so the impact would trigger the stored rounds. That sequence matters because if the vehicle can still see and react, a close defense might save it, but if the eyes are cut first, the follow-up becomes almost guaranteed. So the strike was not random swarming. It was an assembly line process built around disabling control and then igniting ammunition. And that disciplined rhythm is what made the collapse feel fast and hard to interrupt. The BUK M3 took the most dramatic hit because it was struck while missiles were still on the rails, so the damage did not stop at one blast. The source describes an EFP warhead effect, where a formed metal jet moves at extreme speed and can pierce missile casing, which is the worst case for a launcher carrying live rounds. When the remaining 9 M317M missiles ignited, solid propellant burned almost at once, and the vehicle turned into a massive fireball with secondary explosions. Even without adding extra details, the logic is clear, because stored energy on a launcher is not passive. It is a loaded chain reaction waiting for a trigger. That is why a single small drone can cause damage that looks out of proportion to its size. And after that first big detonation, every other launcher in the area becomes psychologically and tactically exposed. The same pattern then rolled onto the BUK M2 and the modernized BUK M1, because once the attackers prove the method works, repeating it is the fastest path to a full kill. A pair disables the vehicle's ability to guide or coordinate. Then another hit sets off what is already mounted, which can scatter fragments and burn out the chassis beyond repair. The result is not just loss of platforms because the whole battery loses coverage, and that creates a temporary hole at the regional level. In practical terms, a gap like that can give Ukraine a short window to push more UAV activity, scout deeper routes, and set up precise strikes with less risk from medium-range air defense. So the final question is no longer how strong BUK is on paper, but whether any BUK battery can survive when FPVs can reach the dead zone and hit the stored missiles problem head-on. This sequence delivers a cold lesson about modern war. Because a decoy does not need to win by firepower, it only needs to make a defender light up long enough to be found. Once Snowdrift was hit and power was cut, the BUK group lost its eyes and its command flow, so launchers with live missiles turned into targets that could be hunted one by one. The paired FPV method made the damage hard to stop, because one drone removed control while the second one triggered stored rounds, and that can turn a vehicle into its own explosive chain. The result is bigger than burned hardware, since a local air defense layer can collapse and leave a temporary gap that changes what UAVs and precision strikes can do. The open question now is what comes next, whether Russia shifts to stricter emission discipline and more mobile radars, or whether it builds a thicker close layer like SHORAD and defensive drones to stop FPVs in the dead zone. If this kind of clear battlefield breakdown matters, like the video and subscribe to Military Force.